Speaking of parent-child relationships when it comes to religion, we actually have a caller on the line who wants to talk about their relationship with their father. So we're going to go to D in Iowa. D, you are on the line with Jimmy and Sophia. What is going on in the great state of Iowa?
It is colder than you know what out here. Hey, Jimmy. Hey, Sophia.
Hey.
Hi.
So what is up, D? Sophia and I are here talking about family dynamics, and you chimed in at the perfect time. So what's going on?
So I did not grow up in a religious household, like fundamentalist type religion. My mom did make me do things like go to Sunday school, go to, vacation Bible school in the summertime. She kind of wavered between sometimes going to the Methodist church and sometimes going to the Baptist church and sometimes not going to church. So, and Dad was an agnostic. When I came out in the early 90s, I knew that his objection to my sexuality was not based on religion. So I didn't have to go through that trauma, thank goodness. And I ended up being, much more religious than they did. I took all of those little lessons in Sunday school and that to heart. At 7 years old, I was trying to convert my playmates, during recess, and very serious about it. When I got out of the Air Force, I really threw myself into Bible study. And I remember my folks ran a boarding house in this small town. We had, when the railroad was still operating, the railroad workers would come in and stay overnight. They would rent rooms there. And one of the boarders there was a good family friend that was going to seminary. He wanted to be a Catholic priest. And I asked him one day to pray for my father, because at that point I was getting very fundamentalist and I was worried about his soul. And I got in. He went and told my dad that I had asked for him to pray for him, and Mom and Dad got extremely upset with me. And it was like kind of a reverse of what so many people, go through, getting family against them for not being religious. And this was, and it just made me more determined to learn more and become more godly and closer to Jesus and other things throughout my life. So I consider myself lucky in some ways. And my heart really goes out to people who are, that the religion is used against them so ferociously and so abusively. So that's my short little story.
Yeah. So I can identify with some parts of that personally in that my mother was Church of Christ and my father was, he wouldn't like the term lapsed Catholic, but functionally it was very Catholic if you talked about it, but didn't tend to go to mass very often. You'd watch it on TV a lot, but neither of them really went to church as often. And yet they were very approving when we would go to church. So my sister and I kind of almost self-radicalized in a way. And we would consistently go to church because it was sort of this feeling that that's the right thing to do. And my parents would pay lip service to that. And I think did believe it. It's just they didn't realize how seriously maybe we were taking that. You know, if you take your kid to Sunday school or send them to church or vacation Bible school or all the manners of free Christian childcare there are a lot of those. I think sometimes it'll feel like, oh, well, that's generally good. Like I grew up going to it. And they won't realize how we're being told you're going to go to hell if you do not follow these rules and pray this prayer and, you know, some of the church I was in get literally baptized. And so we're going to take that very seriously and try to convert people in our lives because we're young and we love our parents. So don't we want them to be, you know, safe and saved and not go to hell? Don't we want to see them later on? Exactly. So it comes from this very earnest place. And it's interesting to me when folks, maybe religion didn't have that impact on them when they were growing up and kind of going through the motions of going to Sunday school, but it really can. And for me, it was sort of similar. It was almost to some degree my teenage rebellion to be just so perfectly virtuous. You know, I didn't swear, I didn't drink, I didn't do any of those things that people almost see as like teenage rebellion because I looked at my parents and I was like, you're not godly enough. I can make you feel like shit by being perfect in my Christianity. Now that's a very twisted thought, but that is how I sort of, my teenage rebellion was being perfect and was also like religion was used both as this thing that I was measuring myself against and that I knew there was like power in performing, if that makes sense. And there was that layer of, I really thought everyone was going to go to hell. And I couldn't figure out if my dad was actually going to go to hell or not because he was Catholic. That was always its own question. Like, does he have to be Protestant? That's its own thing. But yeah, I think that children take these things seriously. And they love the people around them very much. So I can see why your parents were sort of offended. Like, what is she doing asking people to pray for me? But at the same time, I totally get where you're coming from, where you're trying to save them in the way you have been told how.
Right. Yeah. From the people at the church where my mother was sending me. So, you know, it was, I remember having pictures of Jesus in the house and in my bedroom when I was little. I know that Mom put those pictures up there. So it was like he was always there, you know, watching over me. And I got really, it was like central Nebraska and a very tiny town. So it wasn't fundamentalist. There were really no fundamentalists. I didn't get into that until I moved into a bigger city and found Assemblies of God and the non-denominational. And that concern for my dad never left me until after he was gone, and I started really backing away from spiritual thinking and beliefs. Excuse me, sorry about that. So,
did you ever come out sexually in church?
Not in church. I was already, by the time I came out, I had sworn off organized Christianity. But I did come out to a couple of friends, they had basically been strong mentors and best friends for me in the church during the time when I was completely submerged in the Assembly of God. I lived with Christians. I worked with Christians. I worshiped with Christians. I had, the leisure time with Christian, everything. So I did because they would every once in a while get in touch with me after I moved away and got married to my best friend and had turned to paganism. And they would call me and just to get in touch, see how I was doing. And they would always tell me, oh, you've got to come back to the church. You got to start reading your Bible again. You got to do this, do that. I had never said anything to them really until I just got tired of the calls and that. And I decided it was time to be honest with them, and they would either accept it or not. And I sent them a long email explaining, hey, you remember Julie? I married her. I am a pagan. I love my life. I'm doing great. I just felt that you needed to know. And the only response was, we'll pray for you, and I never heard from them again.
Oh. Well, it really sounded to me like you were starting to tell us that you actually got support from some of your Christian friends. So I'm disappointed to hear that in the end they gave you the old "I'll pray for you" thing. A big criticism that many atheists have about people who claim to be so morally superior, religious people, let's put it bluntly, is that they're so quick to turn their back on others. And unfortunately, it sounds like you had to go through that experience. And I'm so sorry that you did, but you were able to take your best friend with you and marry her. So I think that's great. But yeah, it's always baffled me how you can be so pious and profess to be so morally superior because you have aligned yourself with the most powerful and the most loving God, the creator of the universe. And also you can turn your back on your own children and on your neighbors, which directly conflicts with the point of view of your Savior, who tells you to love your neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
You can hate people that don't look like you or think like you. You can hate immigrants, and you can spread hate in general. It is such a hypocritical platform to take. And, I'm just so sorry that you had to deal with that. If you don't mind, I'm really intrigued by your story. What is Julie up to these days? How are you guys doing? And how long has it been since you guys were able to kind of escape the clutches of your Christianity and get married?
Well, that is another whole story in itself, Jimmy.
Okay. Well, don't feel like you have to share something you don't want to.
Yeah.
But I love a feel good story, and I think even just the one that you've told us shows that there's some hope out there for people that are struggling with their true identity and what they're being told they have to be, which is, such a travesty, because nobody should have to tell us what we are. They should help us figure out who we are.
Yeah. I have
try to put away. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead. I'll remember my point.
Well, what I was going to say is try to put away the fear. people out there, you are so much stronger than even you know right now. And yeah, it's hard. And you might have your heart broken, but the feeling of being free is so worth it.
I love that. I feel like I want that on like a button or t-shirt or something, or just a daily affirmation.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's wonderful. You know, thinking about the idea of like telling someone, you know, who you are, who you're supposed to be, you know, I feel like parenting is maybe a big theme today. And at least, you know, for me, I started off being like, I'm tired because I'm parenting a small person. But I remember being around, I was like a teenager talking to other teenagers about, I was still very much a Christian at this point. It was just some idea that a more conservative contingent I was around at the time didn't necessarily agree with. And one of the adults who was kind of around this group, because you're always monitored when you're a Christian youth, it was just turned to the other parents and said, don't worry, you can reprogram them later. And there was so many different emotions in there for me. One being that it was clear they thought I was somehow being bad or contaminating people with my ideas or with whatever I was saying. And no one was going to, it wasn't bad enough they were going to necessarily say that I was wrong, but apparently it was bad enough that they didn't want their children acting like me. And that was how I found out, was sort of just someone saying, oh, don't worry, like you can just exert your control over your own children later. And then the inherent troubling implication, they think children can and should be programmed, and that exposing them to ideas is dangerous and you need to take them back home and rewire them so they can do all of the right things again. I thought that was really disturbing even at the time. And I was still a Christian. And also it was really hurtful because I was like, many of these people are the ones who supposedly love me. I was part of their church. And yet I'm still being thrown out there as like, it's just too different. It's just too dangerous. It's somehow too wrong. Yeah, when you mentioned that, you know, you might get your heart broken, there's 1,000 little ways you get your heart broken when you're part of the church by being told you're not good enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dee,
Oh, yeah,
thank you
they do
so
that
much for
all the
being
time.
willing to call
Yeah.
and share such an intimate part of your life. Did you have something else you wanted to say?
No, that's really all. I'm glad that I got to talk to you guys. Thanks so much for taking my call, and you guys have a great rest of your Sunday.